So, if people don't remember, for our October read, it was Stephen King's The Institute, his 2019 big novel.
I wouldn't count this as a horror because it didn't scare me at any point. There were
No.
only one or two parts where it even felt tense or like I needed to keep reading to see what happened.
My thoughts of it, the first 2/3, boring. The last third, quite entertaining. Until then, also the last like 20 pages. So for me, this was disappointing.
All right, friends, Future Jenna here, jumping in once again with our trigger warnings. So these are just going to be for the book we are discussing, but there are some pretty serious ones, so just bear with me just one moment here. In this book, there are some pretty in-depth discussions on kidnapping, murder, gun violence, mistreatment and injury to children, including hitting, electrocution, drowning, all of those really crazy types of things, as well as discussion and description of suicide and description of torture. So if any of those are going to be triggering for you, again, I know those are some pretty intense ones. Please keep that in mind. And if this is not going to be the episode for you, maybe skip this one. But if you are going to be okay with those, or if you've already read the book, then let's jump on into the episode.
So yeah, spoilers. Where do you want to start?
Oh boy. I don't even know.
I'll start with just kind of
figure out where you want to start.
Well, I'll start with just, like I said, because I have a big problem with how Tim was handled in that whole prologue thing. It felt like Stephen King attached a random short story he wanted to write to the front of this book and then realized, wait, this has to be connected somehow. Because and I don't mean to be, because I still think I'll love his classics like Carrie and Shining and It, but it was just like this, the flap doesn't mention Tim at all, the back cover or anything.
Okay, but it just because it doesn't
mention
someone.
Not to the fact that it just didn't mention someone, but it felt like we were starting a different book. It did not fit with what I was told. And that was kind of the boring story, because we're following him. He leaves the plane and he wants to drift. And we're hearing him take odd jobs on this road trip until he finally ends up in the town of Dupre and becomes a night knocker, which, for those who don't know, is basically kind of during the night when police are,
again, a very old-fashioned term.
very small town that, the police unit, I think they only have like 10 officers, they said, or 8 is the total. And so
something like that, yeah.
A night knocker just roams the streets, knocks on businesses, knocks on doors, makes sure everyone's closed up and all that.
And basically has a clock with a key in it.
Yeah.
If you watch old like Sherlock Holmes and stuff like that, you'll see it sometimes.
Yeah.
Where it's this big thing that they will carry, and when they start one of their rounds, they'll turn it so that they know what time they started, and then when it ends and things like that.
Yeah. And so it's build up to kind of put Tim in a certain situation, because he is the night knocker, and he's doing a good job with it. He ends up being there for months. He says he'll eventually get to New York to meet his friend who is going to offer him security, because I think you mentioned it. Tim lost his job as a police officer in the town he lived in.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, he lost it because he ended up in a shooting where he killed a kid he thought had a gun.
He didn't kill anyone. He got off duty and went to the mall to pick up some shoes. Some woman, because he was still in uniform, ran up to him and said, this young man, whatever, is waving a gun around and we need you to show up. And so he goes over to help and basically pulls his gun, and because the gun that this young man is waving, he can't quite tell if it's real, but it looks real. And so he pulls it and basically shoots at the ceiling and hits one of those like big fluorescent lights in malls.
Right.
And it falls and hits someone. They end up in the hospital, but they don't die or anything. They get hurt and they're suing the police department.
And so he gets fired, discharged from it. So his buddy was going to hire him in New York for security. So he ends up as the night knocker, says he feels the need to because his grandfather was one and liked it.
Again, he thinks it's a sign. It's like this character of Tim every once in a while has little glimpses of, we're going to talk about fate. And then he never does.
And that's the thing is
starting this conversation and never.
And it's supposed to be hints to a reveal in the epilogue, which we'll get to, but these didn't feel like hints. It felt like it was supposed to be more supernatural. Yeah. So the whole lead up is that on one of the nights, he's a night knocker. He saves a guy's life who gets mugged, gets shot. It's a pair of brothers, and one of them gets shot and is, bleeding out on the floor. And Tim saves him. And then the sheriff says, "Hey, do you want to be a cop again? I don't care about your bad rap. I will hire you as a cop."
Obviously, you're good at being a cop.
Right. And then that's where that kind of ends. And then you jump to Luke in the beginning of his story. Mm-hmm. So the whole setup is to make you care for Tim and trust Tim so that when Tim comes back to
And you Luke, do. I would say it succeeds in that. By the end of that, again, not chapter, but like big portion before the next
that's
header,
where it picked up.
Or at least I felt like, okay, this is at least overall seems like a good person. He seems trustworthy, which is, I think, really the only point of that is once Luke got to Dupre. And
he is somebody who we knew
Tim was
could be
the
an ally.
Yeah, Tim was the one that found him. We needed to know that he was a good guy, I guess.
Well, and that's the thing is because that's what he was basically the device for Luke to trust, because what made it wasted was the whole point was we build him up to now he's going to be a cop again. And after all this, it doesn't turn out. He doesn't really end up being the cop again.
Yeah, he doesn't
at all.
In the end.
Because shit hits the fan at the sheriff's station and he just does not choose to be a cop. I was like, then what was the point of that buildup to trust him? He starts
dating one of the other deputies. And there's this line at the very end where, again, we will go into it, but basically shit hits the fan and everything goes crazy. And there's one line that he says when we're getting his inner monologue. And he says something along the lines of, "Oh, I thought I could have stayed in Dupre. I could have stayed with Wendy." And then that's the end of that thought. And I'm just like, are you serious right now?
We built you up for 40 pages to be the badass cop of this small town. And so it just bothered me because Tim...
He didn't take over as sheriff when the sheriff gets shot? Like, nothing.
He was literally, like you said, there to be the ally for Luke. And so he felt like a wasted character. So that's where I was pissed on that. With the story
Which made me mad because he was a really interesting character.
I liked him. And with Luke... and with all of Luke... When you get introduced to him, it's very much about him being a genius. You kind of start with his parents having a talk with the principal of the talented school he's in, saying that they want to send this kid to 2 colleges.
Yeah.
At 12 years old.
Yeah. Then the next chapter is him taking the SAT, I think. But basically, it's the headmaster calls in his parents and says, "No, nothing's wrong. He's not in trouble. There's nothing left that we can do for him." One of the teachers compares it when he's talking to the headmaster, and then I keep saying headmaster, the principal, then relates it to his parents as well. But basically this teacher compares it to Jesus teaching the elderly.
Yeah.
Which was a lot for me. Like, that just seemed
nice
unnecessary. But yeah, he compares it to this and it's like, "We have nothing else to teach you, my son. Go forth to MIT and also Yale and also this place." I don't remember what he was going to go to. I think one of them was MIT.
It was MIT and I think Emerson.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, so he says, "There's nothing else we can do for him. Bye. Have a nice day. Here's a diploma."
Yeah.
And cut to Luke taking an SAT and getting into both of these schools, early admission. And
then after that, it's then his parents, the night he gets kidnapped, his parents
he never
killed.
Gets to go. Isn't that so sad?
Oh, God. Well, and that's the thing is I felt like we could have cut the whole Tim opening and built up the parents more because it didn't feel tragic. I got to know them for like two little chapters, and then their death was,
I felt
they're
that
dead.
As well. Obviously, it's heartbreaking reading about these characters getting shot.
Because that's one of the
which is
one of the
so
heavy
terrible.
detail moments.
Yeah, and that'll obviously have been reflected in my trigger warnings at the beginning, but it's so descriptive and just unnecessarily descriptive. But so it's obviously horrific to read that, and like they have a young child. Like this is so upsetting. But at the same time, we didn't have enough time to care about those characters really.
No.
So I liked the beginning with Tim because it made me like him for later.
Right.
So maybe keep that in, but like I wish this book is so long. I wish part of the 600 pages might have been talking about their home life or the parents relating to Luke or something before they were killed, because then as you're reading Luke and in the Institute, I feel like obviously Luke has memories that he can cling to and be like, oh, but my parents, good times, I can remember good things and people are good.
We don't have that.
And so he has things to cling to. As we were reading these chapters upon chapters upon chapters of him in the Institute and having these tests, we didn't have anything like that for him to, or for us to cling to for him.
The one that
I just wish we had more of that.
The one that hits the bullseye on that, Luke keeps referencing his best friend Rolf, who we never meet. He
see him, quote unquote, once. Where like if it's a movie, he would have been in a shot. Where after school, his parents are picking him up, and it's like, oh look, he's over there talking to his best friend and next door neighbor Ralph, and that is it.
And then he keeps referencing Ralph and the times they shared and all that. I was like, I don't even know what Ralph looks like.
Yeah, and obviously that's not necessary. Stephen King wanted to immediately get into the meat of the story, which he did after the whole Tim part. But like, my favorite parts of books are the characters. I love a character-driven novel. It's just that is what drives me in my reading, is the characters and their lives.
Exactly.
And so I would have really liked to have seen just a little bit of his home life before everything happened and he went to the Institute. Maybe just like a day at school with Rolf, like just one.
A little
and
back
then
and forth
dinner
with
his parents, like something.
Yeah, and so I felt like a little rant on it, where I felt like we got the most pre-Institute character interaction with Luke was when he was at the SATs. He talks with these high schoolers who kind of want to try and pick on him because they're like, why is this young kid here? And Luke kind of one-ups them and then they leave. But it was
this girl, you can assume she's a junior or a senior taking the SAT. Like you said, it seems like they want to kind of poke fun at him a little bit. And he says, oh, I'm here to take the test, just like you. And immediately this high school girl goes over to him and is like, what answer did you get for question 7 or whatever? He's like, oh, I got this one. She's like, I didn't get that.
Right. And so it was like his interaction.
So funny to me.
His interaction with that girl was more than I felt with his interaction with parents, because he keeps also referencing that interaction with that girl. Mm-hmm. And it's just
which I thought was interesting.
And so I thought that was going to come back somehow to something. Like maybe this girl
I thought the girl was going to work at the Institute.
Yeah,
like, I was waiting for her to come back. She didn't. Spoiler alert. But I was waiting.
I was like, oh my God, it's the SAT girl, that bitch. And
right. It was like she was on the team that killed my parents, or she's secretly Gladys, like something. I figured maybe it was a scout for the Institute or
one of the evil doctors that you heard about in back half. I was like, oh, but no.
I mean, she was 16, so that probably wouldn't have made a ton of sense.
Well, I would have thought that maybe it turned out she was a woman who looked younger, so she was a scout. Maybe that she was keeping an eye on him,
I was waiting for her to come back. She did not. I was disappointed.
And so then kind of the next section of the book is, like I said, all the testing. Luke going through the horrific tests, getting tortured, and what is it that they're trying to do with these? And so the back cover and flap makes it almost seem like they want to take the powers or discover where they come from, when in truth what they want, it's supposed to be this big conspiracy where it turns out they're using the kids where all these tests are really to kind of try and boost their powers, but also give them a cap so they don't become too powerful.
Mhm.
They put them all in a room, basically turn their minds into mush, because what makes you actually more powerful, the kids discover, is wanting to use the power, is the belief
It's
in
the
want,
choice, basically.
the
It
choice of
being yourself instead of
kind of having a goal with the power. And so what they do is they get rid of their minds. And when they get rid of their minds and become mindless zombies, then the power is stronger.
I wouldn't say that necessarily. It's not, I don't think that it's on purpose.
No.
I don't remember what the analogy is that Luke and Avery use. I should have written that down. Most of this book I read in bed, so I took about approximately 0 notes. But so I don't remember exactly what it was, but it seems like just the more they are forced to use their powers, the less of themselves and their personalities that there are, until really the only thing left of their minds is the power. Like, they are kind of just vessels for the power at that point.
And so what they then do is they use all of that power, because with the testing of, even if they're TKs, telekinesis, they then make them get TP, telepathy. And so the whole plan is to get them all to have at least a base of telepathy, so then they can assassinate people out in the world who they think will cause a chain of events threat to the earth. And so the big reveal is, you learn there are more institutes. They're all over the world. But that's the last
and
second.
So the big reveal happens, like, it's first mentioned, I guess. We talked about Maureen, who is the housekeeper that helps Luke escape.
And the only kind one.
Well, I mean, she was spying on the kids and being like, it's safe here, you can tell me. And then it wasn't. So I wouldn't say kind necessarily, possibly redeemable. Sympathetic is the word I would use. But anyway, she's the housekeeper that helps him escape. It's kind of all you really need to know.
Yep.
But when he escapes, she gives him a flash drive. Oh my God. Speaking of forced nostalgia, all I could think of was floppy disk.
Oh my God.
My brain just then.
The other day, I will say, just a little random side note, the other day when I had to get my new laptop, because my laptop crapped out, my mom randomly mentioned, she was like, why not just use a floppy disk? And me and my dad at the same time both looked at her and almost in sync was like, how old are you?
I've seen a floppy disk since I was like 10.
Right. But continuing, Maureen gives him a flash drive where she confesses her sins, essentially.
Yeah, it's mostly I want to get these things off my chest to make me feel better.
Because she commits suicide when Luke leaves, because she knows they'll kill her anyway.
Yeah, so it's mostly just like, I want to get these things that I did out into the world to make me feel better. And that was a little frustrating. Again, not necessarily on Stephen King's part, but on the character, like, why is what you want to say. But she does, like you said, commit suicide. And that is one of the moments I was alluding to earlier in the episode that is incredibly descriptive. And it's not, we don't get her point of view, so we don't watch her commit suicide.
It's already the aftermath.
Yes, but another one of the janitors and Mrs. Sigsby, the headmistress, find her, and the discussion of how they find her, what she looks like, what happened,
shape the body's
all of these things. Yeah, just incredibly descriptive.
Yeah, and I'll agree with that a little bit. I was for me, it was when I won't say it because people won't know, but what happens when a body is done, when he grabs her and he makes a joke about it. I'm like, I didn't need to hear that. But past that, so the video after her sins, she then actually has footage of Ward A, which keep calling...
Which is the other part I was fully talking about. This was necessary for the story, but the amount of depth that he went into it. I
So
think
this was
unnecessary.
the back half of back half. What was Ward A? And it's where they go
call
and
it Gorky Park. So when these kids basically are just shells and they don't have their minds left anymore, the people at the Institute refer to them as Gorks, Gork. I'm not sure why. I am a bad podcast host. Like, I didn't look it up.
It's got to be some sort of reference, but I almost got the feeling that it was extremely offensive, but we just don't know.
That's the thing. Kalisha, the little girl we had mentioned, little girl, she's like 13, I think.
Yeah.
Once you're above the age of like 23, I feel
everyone
starts seeming 10. She is a young Black woman, and she later on, once they are trying to overthrow the Institute, and Nikki, the kind of James Dean rebel without a cause guy in the Institute, starts referring to the Gorks, and she relates to it as the N-word. She's like, this is as bad as you calling me this. Yeah. So like, we can't call them that. So it has to be a reference to something, but I didn't look it up. I'm the worst. I was so busy and didn't want to think about this book anymore.
I was having a hard time reading through it too. But so Maureen gets the footage of Ward A, and essentially when they are the mindless shells, it's this room where they basically roam. Some of them are naked, some of them are half naked. There's literally a trough for them to defecate in, almost as if
it describes a girl doing just that.
And then there's a trough for food that is almost like just it
like
literally
a pig
is
trough.
just it's just
I read Charlotte's Web for the You episode, and it was literally that, but in this room for children.
They said some of them just dunk their face in it and don't even eat. It's just they know that that's supposed to be sustenance, and so
even once they try to start this uprising, for lack of really a better term for it, and they try to kind of take control of the Institute, there obviously aren't clothes necessarily for them to give these Ward A children. And so it's these main 5 kids, obviously excluding Luke because he's gone at this point. So the other 5 that were his good friends in front half that had then moved to back half. And then just this nameless, basically mindless blob of children that are all naked and dirty and covered in really terrible things.
Some of them are banging their heads on the wall, shouting out random phrases.
They refer to Ward A, or they reference it as an old-fashioned insane asylum, basically, where there was one line, again, if it hadn't been 2 a.m., I would have written it down, but it was something about, it was an asylum back when they didn't fix anyone, they just kept them.
Yeah.
Like, they just lived the rest of their life there, and it was so much.
Yeah, and so with that kind of is all the start of like the last third, because as we said, when they're in there, they meet all the friends, horrible things happen, all the tests, and then Luke escapes, and that's when it picks up, because I loved watching it was a long section of Luke traveling and getting away. Like, Maureen gave him, steps of how to leave. Like, okay, when you climb out under the fence, like literally that's what was all it took to get out of the Institute.
She planned out his entire escape for him.
She had roadmaps for him to hit.
There's an ice machine where they would talk a lot. And she's like, get the scoop from the ice machine, use it to dig a hole under the fence and get out that way. You're going to go right on the other side of the fence from the trampoline, and then take half a step, like a medium step to your right, so you're facing that way, and then walk directly in that or in that direction.
For about 2,000 steps.
Yeah, about 2,000 steps. And when you get to the big yellow light, you'll meet a fence and walk to the right of the fence until you see a scarf tied in a tree, and then keep going that direction. Like, there will be a boat. It was so in depth. And I'm like,
right.
when the hell
did she have the time to do this?
Did she have the time to do this shit? Let me tell you, she did not.
No. And so
it was much.
That's when the book picked up, is Luke's escape, because like I said, the tests were repetitive. Nothing was happening in the Institute. Slowly his friends were going to back half, and then it was just him and Avery and new kids that you didn't even care to know, because you just knew, oh, we have more kids all of a sudden. We're becoming a full institution now. But when he escapes, he, hops on a freight train like the cover shows, and there are a few almost close calls on that. And then he eventually ends up in Dupre and finds Tim, him and Wendy, the other officers. And that is then when it...
Shocking. There's someone spying. A spy. There is discussion. Along with Tim's and Luke's and Avery's, we also get the point of view of a couple of the adults in the Institute. Not very often, it's much rarer, but just enough to kind of know where Luke's story is going to go. And at one of those points, we do learn that there are people, kind of like scouts, working for the Institute in every town that this train Luke is on stops
somehow. All over the country, supposedly.
Every single town in all of the U.S., apparently. And so...
I did like...
someone waiting for him in Dupre also.
I did like how it turned out to be someone that we did kind of get to know. In Tim's time...
And was already creepy.
Right. It was like, in Tim's prologue, he does stay for a little bit at a motel that's very cheap and it's run down and no one really likes to go there. And the owner is named Norbert, and he's just a guy who likes to walk up and kind
that was his name.
he gets to like, he
what
likes
an old man name.
Oh yeah, Norbert Hollister. And
I hate that.
He likes to go to his guests and kind of just ask questions. And even Tim is like, go away, like,
isn't it mentioned that he also... Yes, because so before he decides to stay, obviously, Tim meets with the sheriff. This is not important to the story at all, but it's very funny to me now that I remember it. But obviously, he meets with the sheriff to talk about a job as the night knocker. And he's like, yeah, go to Norbert and you can stay in the motel, blah, blah, blah. Check the bed before you lay down because there's probably bed bugs. Also... And then the sheriff kind of looks at him and he's like, nah, never mind. You're good. You still have that cop look about you, so he probably won't try and sell you drugs. And you're like, what? So apparently Tim looks like a cop and that's all we know about him.
Well, right. And then... And so Norbert's the guy who kind of likes to just ask questions. And so I was waiting for, when Luke got to Dupre, all right, who is it? I'm going to assume it's one of the deputies or the sheriff. It's going to be someone
I expected it to be one of the cops.
That we wanted to be a good guy. Yeah. And then it's Norbert. I was like, that bastard. Or
like it's Wendy. Ooh, that would have been a plot twist.
I would have hated that because Tim and Wendy do end up together and it was so cute, even with how small that relationship was in. And then I was like, I swear to God, if Wendy's the stringer, I'm going to lose my mind. And so, but no,
yeah, it was this already creepy guy. So we weren't mad about it. We were like, checks out.
Orphan Annie. Orphan Annie is the town's... We haven't mentioned
her yet.
No, she's
not important to the plot really until...
She's the wacky character.
Like, second to last chapter, but
she's the town's crazy homeless woman who believes...
Yeah, she's kind of the town crazy lady.
And she believes in conspiracy theories, and she always talks to Tim about them. But it's funny because then when Luke comes and tells the story, she's like, I was right!
She's like, oh, they came in black vans, didn't they? Black sedans. And then they did this, and they killed your parents, and they kidnapped you, didn't they? And he's like, yes!
Yeah, and she's the one, because that's when action happens, is basically Mrs. Sigsbee takes a crew, some of the extraction teams to go get Luke, and it ends up in a shootout at the sheriff's office. A lot of the cops die.
So all of the cops die,
except for Wendy and Tim, and the one cop who was not in town, who was on vacation.
Yeah, and the one that's on vacation. who then becomes sheriff, even though Tim
Why
shouldn't
not?
become sheriff just
Why not?
because that's the only thing that would have made the
It makes
first
sense.
portion seem worthwhile.
Relevant.
Anyway, yeah, relevant is the word I was thinking of. I swear to God, my brain. But yeah, so like he said, it ends up in a shootout. That makes sense. A whole team from the Institute goes to this town and figures he'll be at the police department. So they go there and they have lots of guns. The police have some guns, but not as many at the ready because they don't know it's coming. I was prepared for this. And then Stephen King decided, apparently, that stereotypical Southern, like, gun-toting Southerners were gonna save the day.
Orphan Annie's one of them.
She's there with her like sombrero and weird outfit and has a gun in each hand. And this is the only quote that I wrote down for the entire book because it was so ridiculous. She's looking at these heavily armed with like machine gun people, ex-military.
Right.
And she looks at them and says, "This isn't playing, boys. You're in the South now."
Yep.
and
so
I hated it so much.
So yeah, and
I was so mad. I turned to Nick and I said, "God damn it. The Southerners with guns are trying to save the day, and watch, they're going to." I was over it at that point.
It was funny and ridiculous. And yes, so all the cops die, but Tim and Wendy, and including the big bad sheriff, and all
that one made me sad just because he seemed cool.
Yeah,
he was a fun character.
And all the others die except for Mrs. Sigsbee and one of the doctors who constantly
Dr.
tries to.
Evans.
Yeah, and he's like, "I was forced on this trip against my will."
Which, to be fair, he kind of was.
Right.
That is one of the only other, like, from Sigsbee's perspective, moments that we get is him being like, "I don't want to go," and she's like, "Suck it up."
And they try to give him a gun. He's like, "I don't want to touch it." And they're like,
"Yeah,
then you're going to die."
He's kind of forced to be there. He's not lying. But they are the only two that survive.
And so then this leads to Stackhouse back at the Institute realizes this is, well, no, he doesn't realize it, but he's waiting for the call that they have Luke or have killed Luke.
Meanwhile, the kids in back half, led by Avery, figure out that, they figure out they're killing people on the outside without knowing or consenting to doing so. And then they also realize that they can use their powers on their own without being told to do that, and that they can kind of connect and tap into the power of the kids in Ward A as well. And they're also able to reach out to Luke in Dupre. So like they are starting to put pieces together that they can kind of connect with children like themselves outside of the Institute. And that's when they start this uprising. And Avery, with the help of Kalisha and Nick specifically, but also George a little bit, are like, we can be in charge of this place.
They lead it, and essentially what they're working on is then Luke and Tim and Wendy stays behind as their insurance policy, but Luke and Tim take Mrs. Sigsbee and Evans to fly all the way back to the Institute because he got states away. Like the Institute's in Maine and he ended up in, was it South Carolina?
I think.
So they are making their way back to save the kids while the kids are using their combined power to manipulate, beat up the caretakers, break open doors to get out. They get locked in a hallway.
The hallway that connects front half from back half.
Right.
So they're underground.
And so
the hiccups now.
the big climax is that everything happens together. Tim and Luke make it to, they set up a plan
with
where they're
Sigsbee.
Like,
they take her with them. Yeah.
With Sigsbee, you're gonna get us a school bus. The kids are you're gonna let the kids out. We're gonna leave, and I'm gonna give you the flash drive that has the information. And your institute will
Yeah,
maybe
and we
carry
won't
on.
tell anyone. Like, you can
Right.
keep it a secret, but we're taking the kids that are currently in it with us.
Yeah.
It's like, this is not okay.
And
And I'm going to jump in here because right around then is when my favorite scene happens.
okay.
So, like I kind of said, Luke still has this connection to the kids in the Institute, even though he's not there anymore. And they realize that and kind of start talking to him and trying to figure out what his plan is. And he basically tells Tim, I know that we aren't going to be able to save everyone. We're not going there to save them. We're going there to buy them time because I know what they're planning and I know that they will be able to do it on their own. Which I also just liked as an idea because so few people think of children as capable people. Like,
Yeah.
there are some things that they're not capable of doing on their own, but I liked the fact that because it was from Luke's perspective and he and Avery and Kalisha a bit were kind of talking telepathically across states. He was like, hey, Tim, adult in the situation. I got this. And Tim was like, cool.
Yep.
But anyway, and so back at the Institute, they're locked in this hallway underground and they can't use their powers to get out. They had stolen a key card, but someone in the IT, like, security room, basically the surveillance room, locked all of the locks and turned them off. And so you can't use the card anymore. So they can't get out. There's no way for them to do that at the current time. And so they're all sleeping. And it turns out that they're all having this collective dream together. All of them. And it's basically, the only time we really see the dream is through Kalisha's head. But it's basically, she's in a hallway in the Institute and there's a phone ringing and she picks it up, and I don't remember which languages it is or what order they go in, but basically someone in another language, I think it's Italian first, says, hello, can you hear me? And she's like, I don't know this language, but somehow I understand what they're saying. And she responds, yes, I can hear you. And the person hangs up. And then she hears another phone and walks into a different room, and it's a completely different place. And there's another phone that's bigger, and someone in a different language says, hello, can you hear me? And she says, yes, I can hear you. Who is this? They hang up. And it keeps going into these different rooms, vastly different places. The phones keep getting bigger, and every time it's a different language. And all of the kids in this hallway are having this dream. And I think Luke is as well, but it never explicitly says it. It just says that he knows their plan. So I kind of assumed that that was the case.
Because it's Avery is the one who puts it together that means they realize there are more institutes around the world, and they're all doing what they're doing, becoming the hive mind of power to work together. Yeah. And so Luke kind of, I think.
So you get the idea that children in institutes in, like, Korea and Switzerland and all of these other places are also having this dream and feeling this connection.
And having their own uprisings. And so, was your scene the hallway, the dream?
So it's the dream. And then from that, Avery starts referring to the big phone, quote unquote. And that's what I think the next big heading is called, is the big phone.
Yeah.
And it's basically, he, like you said, he, and also Luke, because Luke explains it to Tim, which is when we fully understand it, figure out that this dream is all of these children across the globe connecting with each other through their powers. And Avery starts talking about, I can get us out of here. I can stop this. I can save people. I need to answer the big phone. And which I just thought was really cool. And so it ends up being something that he does completely in his mind, obviously, but he kind of taps into the power of his friends and the Ward A kids and the kids in all of the other institutes. And he takes that in himself and he kind of it seems like goes supernova almost, and just like he becomes the power for all of them.
And that's what I loved is as like the best visual, like if this does get a movie adaptation eventually, like
That's
that
going to
is
be
the
the coolest
scene
scene.
I want to see.
Yeah.
And so he does that. He has basically, when he does that, becomes the supernova, he becomes a sacrifice because then he becomes one of the mindless,
Yeah.
but he is now just that raw power leading the charge. And so he makes sure all his friends get out, and it's this cool moment where he's holding all their hands and he gives each of them a chance to let go.
Mm-hmm.
But before the power link can go away, someone else grabs the hand. And when it gets to the last person, then it's a Ward A person who, even mindless, grabs that hand to keep that link. So you know that part of them is still in there.
It's all instinctual. You can tell,
Yes.
which is really cool. I thought their power was calling to each other, and they were even those Ward A kids that, again, at this point, they are only the shells of the children that they once were. Like, they don't have their minds anymore, and they can't think for themselves.
That was the highest moment. It just, that whole section was...
And this is basically, like you said, there's the big chunks with chapters in it. This chunk was the reason that I still enjoyed this book.
Yes, it was that.
And all that's on its own was this portion.
And it still tugged me forward. And so I loved it.
Yeah.
And you know that Avery's not going to make it out of this then after that, which is so sad. And so
his last thought, I have to say, one thing that I did think was so dumb and unnecessary was apparently he was kind of bullied at school when he was a kid, when he was at regular school, which
exposition
made me sad.
Dump again.
But basically, like you just said, you know that Avery's gonna die. You know it. The other kids, the main 5 or 4 now without Avery, doesn't matter. The other ones are running through the institute as it is literally falling down on top of them. Like, the amount of power is too much for this building, and it is raising into the air, and they have to jump out through a window to get down to the ground on the outside. But the very last thing, it's like, and then as the like bleach or whatever gas was poisoning him, and as the roof fell in on top of him, Avery's last thought was, I loved having friends.
Yeah, it was a little too much.
Why?
Because he already had kind of that.
So dumb.
Well, because he already did do that, and it found better where it was. Luke said he felt it because Luke now is outside the Institute running into Stackhouse, and he hears Avery's last things where he tries to talk to Avery, doesn't get anything back but 3 words, and it's, they are my friends, like they're my friends, they're my friends. And that was enough. That was
so much more powerful than, and then as he died,
because then we
loved having friends.
Because then one of those chapters gives us his whole backstory of how he was bullied in school, blah, 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 blah. And
give us his backstory, but have it in the beginning, like as he's telling Luke, or as Luke is figuring it out about him, like something. I'm fine with the backstory, but just this is my dying thought was so dumb to me. It was unnecessary.
Yeah,
he was dying a hero's death, and it was really tragic. And then
now it's a little melodramatic.
Took me out of it. That took me out of all the emotion that I had of my character, or my favorite character in the entire book, dying.
And so then it wraps up as what the climax is at the same time, the building's raising, crushing all the leftover Institute people. Tim and Luke use Mrs. Sigsbee as a distraction, and they riddle her with...
that was funny.
Basically,
they make her drive, and she and Tim, as they got off the like private jet that drove Jiminy Christmas, that flew them to Maine. I promise I'm not drunk. I'm just so tired. As they're getting off, there are hats for the company that owns the plane inside of it. And so he makes Sigsbee put one on, and he puts one on, but backwards. And so there's a spy watching them get off, and they're like, okay, Sigsbee got off, announced who she was. She's the good one in our mind. She has her hat on forward, and then the bad guy, quote unquote, the one that's trying to be the hero, has his hat backwards. And then later, like literally 10 feet from the driveway for the Institute, he makes her get out and get into the driver's seat and turn her hat backwards.
And so then they pull in, and they open fire.
Like, she's like
And
got her hand against the
the
windshield.
windshield.
And
they
she's like, don't
riddle her with
shoot me.
bullets. They just fully open fire. But Stackhouse notices at the last second, he's like, ah,
And he's like,
shit.
that's fine.
And that's happening
He's
while the
basically
building's
like, sorry, Julia, sucks to suck.
yeah. And so that happens while the building raises. They crush it on the other half of the institute.
Yeah.
The kids are safe.
At that point,
Stackhouse
the entire building has lifted up into the air
as a
and
ball,
dropped,
essentially.
yeah, and dropped back down onto the administration building.
What I found
So there's nobody left except Stackhouse and the two people that were hidden in the woods.
And I'm sorry, I felt like this was just a cop out to make the ending easier to wrap up because it was kind of awful. You heard that front half was now getting, because all these kids, there were more kids showing up at the institute, but we were only connected to like this crew of 5/6, whatever. And so when they're escaping and Avery's having the big sacrifice, some of those new kids you got to know a little bit, and they just say, oh, they all got crushed in the ball.
Yeah, spoiler alert, none of them survived.
But
these
our main
children
crew,
who just got kidnapped like 2 days ago didn't survive. Basically, they say, so
there was an excuse.
Very, very briefly mentioned Harry or Henry. I don't remember exactly
Harry.
what his name was, but basically there was this 16-year-old kid that had been in front half at the same time as our main core 5. And he got one of his tests and reacted badly to it and died from a really bad seizure from the test. And so what they say basically is once the power got this big and all of the people with the power were all connected like that, the kids who hadn't had any of the tests yet and hadn't learned how to connect yet basically had seizures and all died before the remaining 4 kids could get out.
Which I
but
felt
at the same time, it's like that, like you said, did feel a bit like a cop out. Like we only need to save the core. That's the only kids that people care about.
Right, because it would have been an easy wrap up, but it was also like, so he could have the villain be like, so that the villain could have his moment at the end, the Lisp man, which we'll get to in a sec. Yeah. But it was just like, you could have had all these kids saved and then the whistle was blown and they're all screwed and woo. But no, he wanted there to be an almost possibility that this wasn't 100%
so that
solved.
There was a question mark at the ending.
Right. So all these kids died, only the core 5. And basically then what happens is it's 3 months later.
Is it? I want to say it was only a couple of weeks.
No, it was 3 months because they said 3 months because they referenced how last summer and all of that gotcha. When they're there. And so Wendy and Tim are living together and they've taken in all the kids. Yep,
Her family randomly has a farm that she's living on, and this is the first time we've heard about it.
Orphan
but now
Annie.
She and Tim and all the kids are living there.
And Orphan Annie too?
And also Orphan Annie, yes.
And so she's kind of like the funny aunt.
This is so dumb. Really random. You're also a theater kid. Every time they called her Orphan Annie, did you start singing Tomorrow in your head? Because I did.
No, but it kept popping up.
It. I hated it. The music from Annie is only like so good. Some of the songs are really solid. Some of them are not. But just like, I don't need to sing them in my head ever.
Yeah.
And just, I kept singing the sun come out. It was too much.
Yeah, it was a lot. And so it ends with they're there, and what they basically do is, because they haven't revealed to the public everything, because they know that nobody will fully believe this, because now all the institutes across the world have crumbled and become nothing. Mm-hmm. All the kids free across the world. They basically
all had these uprisings, and no institute, or no big institute, I should say, which we'll get into. Right. None of the main ones are left.
And so they've taken in the kids, and basically they're slowly having each kid end up at the same place, call a family member. Tim and Wendy, they're making the kids do this, and calling whoever.
I don't think it's against their will.
No, but it's how to help them move on.
They're finding the closest family members that they have left,
but they're all doing the same shtick, where
every couple of weeks they're left off at this pier,
and they call and basically are told, oh, they kidnapped me and let me go.
Yeah,
And
I never saw who it was. No, I've never heard of these other children that were found here 2 weeks ago. Like,
wait, my parents are dead, even though they knew.
yeah.
And so they play this farce so that they can just move on with their lives and that nobody will look too deep into it because it'll just be easier for everyone, which makes sense. But then it's to
That
the
was
last...
honestly one of the most believable parts of the book for me.
Exactly. And so then it's
which is so sad.
The last bit where the exposition dump, my God,
Ugh.
the
Tim goes to get the mail, and then.
And so he has only Luke, Nikki, and Kalisha left. And the big boss, Julia Sigsbee, talks about this big boss with the list.
The one that she's terrified of calling.
We don't get to know. He literally just drives to the driveway and literally has this long talk, as we said, to explain what we said.
He's monologuing.
He's
like the evil villain in a superhero movie. He's monologuing.
I literally got syndrome from The Incredibles. You got me monologuing. I can't believe this. And so
it's literally like these are the bullet point. It's like he's talking about the thesis statement of the company. He's like, this is why we do what we do. This is how we do it. Like he's giving a tour of the factory.
Yeah, and so he goes by, he tells you the whole thing about how it's the government trying to protect the world from possible threats by killing domino effects.
That they give is one of the... As the uprising was happening, basically through these movies, quote unquote, that the kids in back half are watching, they learn about their targets, and that's how they are then triggered to force and kill them. And sometimes it looks like suicide, sometimes it looks like a car accident. Any number of things. But they learn about it through these movies. And the example that he gives, I kid you not, is this guy in the movies that they were watching right before the uprising. So he's still alive now, unless he died on his own, I guess. But they didn't end up killing him. And he calls himself Mr. Smith, Bob Smith, or Bill Smith or something.
Yeah, the big boss.
The lisping man is like, this guy that they were supposed to kill and then they didn't. Go figure. He is an evangelical. He's going to befriend someone in 10 years, and they're going to become very close friends. And then 10 years after that, that friend of this evangelical is going to become president. And then another 10 years go by, and then this evangelical best friend to the president is going to tell said president that war is inevitable. And so then the said president starts a war and everyone dies. Like it's so
bad.
Harebrained scheme. Like it's ridiculous.
And then here's the thing is because I'll tell the twist after, but because then how it just kind of closes, because I want to end with my little tangent about how they possibly know of this. But how it closes is basically Luke tells him, well, you forgot about math probability, ties to the SAT test.
Oh my God.
About basically...
Yeah, it's exactly like that SAT question that girl asked me about.
It's the fact that apparently...
That one I almost put the book down and was just like, okay, I'm done. Bye.
Basically, he explains the butterfly effect, but says it's a math equation thing that, you can't...
Which I'm sure it is. I didn't look that up either, and I don't remember the name. But yeah, it's... the math version of the butterfly effect.
Basically
or like
saying
any
that
small choice, he could walk to work one day instead of driving and then could never meet the guy and nothing would happen. Like whatever.
Because they say, we've stopped some. He's like, right, but you've stopped the ones that happen within the day you learn about them. So the probability changes that if it's happening the day you learn about it, it's going to happen. If it's supposed to happen 10 years from the day you learn about it, it's not going to happen.
The probability that it still happens is so small.
And so basically he gives him an FU, like your institute is not going to...
outsmarts him with a math equation.
He tells him
like these things probably didn't happen.
Yeah, and
or
so
wouldn't have happened, I should say.
They said they're going to bring back the institute, but they know it's not going to happen. So the big Bill Smith tucks his tail between his legs and leaves.
That's my
Kalisha.
favorite. He literally backs away and is like, okay, bye, don't tell anyone about us.
Well, yeah, when Luke first talks to him, he steps back knowing Luke is smart and powerful. And so then Nikki leaves to go to his family. Kalisha leaves to go to her family. And Luke is now living with Tim and Wendy. He'll have his happily ever
because
after.
he has no
No
close
one else.
relatives.
Right. So the
Could
thing.
live with Rolf is
Yeah,
what
maybe.
I thought, but also it needed to have a happily ever after, which
Right.
only happens if he lives with the only other character that we
Which,
care about.
well, because it ties with Tim, because Tim was a divorcee because he didn't want kids with his wife or something. He couldn't get the courage to have kids. Now he loves having Luke, a 12-year-old already made kid.
Yeah.
But the thing that made it awful was, okay, well, how did they know? How did they know these bad things were going to happen? A smallest hint is that one of the doctors in the institute thought there were more powers than just telepathy or telekinesis.
And
so
Luke learns that early.
Yeah.
Like,
and it's not touched upon until now.
A quarter of the way into the book, like early.
We learn this
and
book,
just ignores it for the rest.
This book becomes Minority Report. It becomes literally Minority Report because they say, oh, we have a real institute.
We have a secret one, but it's not like this one. It's like an all-inclusive resort institute. Like these people live there their whole lives and there are no tests. They just tell us the future and it's
because
beautiful.
They're precogs. They see the future, they get flashes. And I'm like, this is Minority Report.
Precognition. So they see the future.
And Luke says, yeah, I learned about this. I'm like, when did you learn about that?
I would have loved to see that as the person reading.
And so basically he says that they were the super rares. And Luke's like, they're not really that rare. They're everywhere. And basically,
yeah, he's like, it's basically, have you felt deja vu? Have you gotten a feeling? Cop shows always call them following their gut. Tim, you got off of that airplane. You had a moment of precognition. Like,
and that's supposed to be that fate
not.
talk. That's supposed to be the fate connection. Is you think, wait, is Tim a precog?
It's so dumb.
It tries to tie everything together, and so that's what's just irritated me. Is because as soon as I was reading that, I go, "This is Tom Cruise's Minority Report. That's what this is now."
But from what I know of it, yes,
it's literally that. For people who haven't seen it, sorry, it's like 2001 movie. It's literally cops.
It's okay. The book's in the past anyway.
Right. The cops in the future have precogs who can predict murder before it happens, so they go and arrest them before murder's committed.
Hilarious.
And that's it. And so when I read this, I was like, this is Minority Report, a little more supernaturally.
That, but like
worse. And so so that's a part of the expedition dump. And I'm just like, you've got to be kidding me. And then they basically tell them to screw off. And then they have their happy ending where everybody gets to go live on. And that's basically the best wrap up we could give of that story.
Yeah. The whole thing, there wasn't really.
I love.
So I couldn't find any book club discussion questions. Like there were none about this book. And I'm going to be honest, I didn't want to think about the book long enough to come up with my own. So I don't really have any. The only thing that I have is this like ethical question basically and I don't remember the name of the person who originally posed it, but it's an actual thing where it's the ethical problem of if you tomorrow, knowing everything that you knew, had a time machine and went back in time and killed Hitler as a baby, would that be right? Or would you be in the wrong because you're killing a child? And that's all he based this book off of, basically. He was like, take a little bit of that, take a whole dose of sci-fi kids with superpowers, throw in a dash of police procedural, and you got a book.
Yeah. And like I said, I loved the concept. It's what made me grab the book. Mm-hmm. The execution just did not work for me. It could have been 150 pages shorter.
Yes, hardcore. I just feel like the parts of the story that were the strongest, the relationship between the kids and specifically between Luke and Avery, Tim and Luke's interactions, like
the investigation them to trust
each other. Yeah, the part at the sheriff's department, like all of these things. There were some really strong moments and some really strong aspects to the book that did that I did really like and did make me enjoy parts of the book. And that's why I can't say that I didn't like the book. I just
There
didn't
was
love
too much
it, you know?
slowdown.
He didn't give enough attention, I don't think, to those really strong things and those really strong moments.
I think he was trying to focus too much on making this seem like what he used to write, something that was dark and heavy. So he wanted to.
I feel like he was focusing on the shock factor.
Right.
He was like, the shock of the things that I'm saying are happening to these children. That's going to be enough for people to recommend this book and to love
and
this
it's like,
book.
no.
And it just wasn't quite enough for me.
No. Because I will say what I did is about halfway through, I wanted to see what Amazon reviews said. And majority was,
I read some of the Goodreads reviews too.
Majority, it was 5 stars. And so halfway through, I was like, really? And then it was like, it was always 5s or 4s, and there were 1s. But what I laughed about for the 1s is the 1s all said the same thing. How dare he talk about Trump like that? That was all the 1 stars. It was people mad when he had a Trump reference when there's only like 4 in the 500-page book.
There's one line where I don't remember exactly what it was. It's at the very end. It's during the exposition.
Orphan Annie insults Trump.
Where, yeah, Orphan Annie says something about my aunt or whoever might have been a precog. She knew that my cousin, whoever it was, shouldn't go to this party. And then that very night, the party caught on fire. And Kalisha turns to her and is like, yeah, what did she think of Trump getting elected? And God,
Orphan Annie just throws an
line was
insult.
really funny. I should have, again, written that down. But it was something about no one could have seen that shit happening. And then they high five. And that's it.
Those were the only bad reviews I saw on Amazon, was people who thought, stop getting political, Stephen King. It was like, it was
funny.
Like 4 sentences
Goodreads,
in the whole book.
I didn't see that in any reviews. So I didn't read them until after I finished the book. But yeah, that was not in a single one of them that I saw.
Well,
so that's hilarious, actually.
So to wrap up, because I think we're at that point where we've gone through the story, we've gotten our bits.
Only other thing I want to say, the one note that I made was at like 3 a.m. one morning. I was so tired. And during that shootout, Wendy, the good girlfriend cop, shoots Mrs. Sigsbee in the leg. And she's like, why in hell did you shoot me? And Wendy turns to her and is like, I'm sorry, are you stupid? Why do you think I shot you? But I was sitting in bed, my husband's sleeping next to me, and I literally turned to my journal and wrote, LOL, Sigsbee asked why they shot her. And I was apparently so far gone at that point. I was like to the giggly part of sleepy, I guess, because I can show you. That is literally what it says.
Oh my God, that's so funny. For podcasters, not YouTubers, it's literally there in the journal.
Yeah. With an arrow next to it. Like, pay attention to this. This happened.
Just
so funny.
Like I said, the concept I liked. I think one of the things is like one of the like, what did an author say about this book on the cover was that they said something about like the child like relationship, the child charisma of it. So that makes me excited to read it because the children interactions were the best part of the book.
I have heard it is one of his best works.
So I'm excited.
That one, I think I will still read eventually.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how that plays out in it. And like you said, there are high moments. There are great, well-written moments of story progression, of character interaction. Mm-hmm. It's just bogged down with like exposition in the wrong places, over detailed parts that don't need to be, just for the shock factor or just to be somewhat of a scary or cringy book.
Yeah.
And it just was unnecessary.
It's like scary movies that aren't tense or scary in the sense of like you're on the edge of your seat, you're scared in that sense, but are just very gory. It
or
felt
just have
a bit like that to me, where it was just, he was trying to be like, look how terrible I can be to these children in this book, or look how much of a gross out factor I can give you for the Ward A and the children in it. Like,
Right.
it seemed like he was trying to get us with the gross out factor.
It's the blood massacre effect, or like when a movie's just jump scares, like it's about to happen. Like, oh, it's gonna jump out the closet. 3 seconds later, haha, it jumped out the closet, and just like that's it. So
when the music starts before the jump scare, and you're like, oh,
and then
something
it gets
that's
silent,
happening.
and then blah. So, um, final thoughts. I didn't hate it. I thought I was going to halfway through, but that last third really saved it for me of not being
I was too. Halfway, I was convinced I was going to hate it.
It's not an awful book, but it could have been so much better and so much more reined in. And I think it would have been a classic for me, for my personal library, if it just tightened up a bit.
Exactly. I think because I read a good amount of thriller, and even thriller kind of towing the line to horror. Like, I read some scary books. I read books that I regret reading past my bedtime and then can't sleep. Like, I read scary books and I enjoy them sometimes. But I don't know, because again, this one I feel like was counting on the shock factor and the like, oh, gross. I think if it had been about 450 pages and they had focused a little bit more on those parts again that we said were pretty strong, and a little bit less on these are exactly the tests that are happening. I think you need a certain level of that. Otherwise, the reader's like, what are the tests? Like, why are we not getting that? But hearing about the same tests over and over again, I think was not necessarily needed. So if it had tightened up a little bit, if it had focused just the tiniest bit more on the characters and their relationships, and if we had gotten just a little bit of a different ending, I think I would have really loved it. At no point did I feel drawn into this book.
An idea that came to mind is just now is the parts where it feels like the parts that feel like it could be cut if it needed to be this long. I feel like we could have gone back and forth between Tim and Luke in the Institute.
Almost like a full double perspective type thing.
Well, yeah. And what if Tim's story was he was accidentally discovering the Stringers and the people who were somewhat attached to the Institute who were spies? Because a quick little go back, Tim's thing ends with, like I said, 2 kids mug a guy and he's trying to save his life. And they say that they're kids. I thought this was somehow going to be attached to the Institute, like they were kids that escaped before or something like that.
They're not fully kids. They run this basically a 7-Eleven, but a convenience store.
No. The ones who do mug him, the ones that mug the brothers, because they said it looked like it was young kids who came and took the money. So I thought it was going to be somehow tied to the Institute. So I thought Tim was going to go on this like investigation as just the Night Knocker, and it would have tied together with the Institute and been all this, but it was just the event that made him almost a cop again. And so it was just like, I feel like there was just
almost made him a cop again.
That's the word that I put with this book. Almost. That it's an almost. Everything was just that. And so I don't hate it. I didn't mean to thrash on Stephen King my first read with him.
Like I said, I liked this book. There were parts that I really enjoyed. When I do my review, will probably give it 3 stars out of 5, probably. Okay. There were so many things that could have been more for me, I think. Yep, and there were some things that definitely could have stood to be less for me.
Like I said, it's an almost.
Yeah, it was a near miss. I'm thinking that maybe Stephen King just isn't for me.
Mm-hmm. It could be.
Which I feel like in the book community, Stephen King, you either love him or you don't read any of his stuff. Mm-hmm. Like, there isn't very much in between. Like I said, I think it will probably still be on my list to read at some point, just because I enjoyed the original with Tim Curry. I know that story. I think from what I've heard about it, it should be pretty good character-driven story. But just, I'm thinking overall from reading this and reading Carrie a couple years ago, I'm thinking maybe Stephen King just isn't overall for me,
And
which is
I
fine.
think and I think maybe I'll like his shorter ones. It's massive, but
Mm-hmm.
Carrie and Cujo and some of those others are shorter. And so when it
Yeah,
is
Carrie, I want to say, is around 300 pages. Again,
and
I read
so
it when I was 19, so it was a while ago. But
right, the parts that moved were like a lot happened and it was 100 something pages. So I feel like his shorter stuff will
mm-hmm.
probably work for me. But when he's trying to make an epic like this,
Yeah,
he just
you
does a lot
could
of
tell he was like, this is going to
padding.
be a blockbuster film.
Yeah.
And that almost bugged me more than anything, was you could tell he was like, this scene is going to be a perfect movie scene.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, but the book though.
What
Some of
about
us
this?
read those.
Yeah. So I'd say, are we on the same page about this? Yeah. We're both just iffy with it. It was.
So overall, would you recommend it? And if so, who would you recommend it to?
I don't know if I could, just because, like I said, there are great highs, but I just feel like the highs weren't enough for it. I feel like the highs get weighed down by the padding and the rest of it. So I couldn't recommend it. If you're a normal Stephen King fan who reads everything he's got to read, sure, go ahead, add it to your library. You probably have already read it or planning to read it anyway.
Yeah.
But as someone who wants a good, engrossing, kind of like dark story, this isn't it.
I'm kind of the same boat, maybe just a little bit to one side. I would say, obviously, like you said, if you are a huge Stephen King fan, you've probably already read it, but if you haven't, go for it. It is, for the most part, a pretty compelling story. It's just pretty slow, so just kind of prepare yourself for a bit of a long read. I think that if you are someone that pretty consistently reads pretty thick fantasy, like you are really used to kind of long-winded, for lack of a better term, that's not necessarily the kindest term, but that's all I can really think of to describe it right now, but kind of long-winded story building, setting building, and then character building. A lot of background in some places and setting a lot of the scenes, really descriptive parts. If you pretty consistently read fantasy, you would be pretty used to a lot of that, in my experience with fantasy. So if you're looking for just some darker material, this might be a great book for you. But I think that if you go into this kind of, not to speak for you, but kind of like you did, if I'm correct, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you go into this expecting this is going to be like a scary movie, but on pages, I think that this might not be the perfect book for you. And like I said, I don't remember which episode it was, one of the recent episodes. Not every book is going to be for every person. And there are books that I really don't like that are very highly reviewed on Goodreads or on Amazon, and vice versa. There are books that have an average of about 2 or 3 stars that I just really loved. So if the story just sounds really enticing to you, please read it. We're not telling you that you shouldn't, but these are our thoughts. And maybe would I tell my friends who like true crime to read it? Maybe not. It's much more of a sci-fi read than it is a horror or even a thriller to me.
I would say, I mean, look, like we said, we looked at the online reviews. Majority of people seem to like it. So maybe just for us, it wasn't our cup of tea.
Yeah.
Maybe we're the outliers. So,
and like I said, it's possible that this is just telling me Stephen King is not my guy. And that is totally okay. And so that, might be part of it, is I just don't really mesh well with his writing style or something. Just like with people, maybe you go to a party and meet 10 people, 4 or 5 of them you won't really get along with. it's the same thing with books and with authors. It's possible that maybe I just don't get along with him and his writing style.
Yeah.
So yeah, if it sounds interesting, I say go for it. Just prepare for a bit of a long read. But if you're not already drawn into it, I would say maybe it's not the read for you.
Yeah. So with that, yeah, we're on the same page of it just being kind of an iffy book for us. But yeah. So you want to tell them where they can find us?
I sure will. Let's wrap us up. You can email us anytime at thesamepagepod@gmail.com. Again, that'll be in the description in case you don't know how to spell anything, but it is just the name of the podcast for the most part, so should be pretty self-explanatory. If you have any books you think we should read for the podcast, any questions, collaboration requests, or if you've read any of our upcoming reads, like once we announce our November read, if you've read it and have questions or discussion topics that you would like us to include, go ahead, leave us a comment, send us an email. We'd really like for you guys to be a part of our discussions with us, if at all possible. And then if you want to reach out to me specifically, you can find me on my blog, which hosts all of my full reviews, my tours, anything that I do collaborating with authors and publishers, couldn't think of the word, at tacklingtbr.home.blog, and as well on Instagram at tackling_TBR. And then as for the podcast, you can find and connect with us on Instagram at The Same Page Podcast, on Twitter at The Same Page Pod, and can find us also on Facebook and YouTube just by searching The Same Page Podcast. And then, as always, the last thing I'm going to say is if you are listening to our show and you like what you hear, please consider heading to Apple Podcasts or wherever it is you're listening to us. If it's on YouTube, or maybe if by the time you're listening to this, Amazon Music is working, wherever you're listening to it, and subscribing, giving us a positive rating, and leaving your thoughts in a review. It's a process. It really only takes a couple of minutes, but it really means the world to small shows like us and helps us get introduced to more bookish folks.
Yeah. And so we're Stephen King, The Institute. Very interesting read. We're very excited to announce our November book come our next check-in with a extra surprise with that announcement as well.
Make sure to keep an eye on our Instagram just in case we announce it early. We might for this one just because it's kind of a special book discussion episode. But either way, that check-in episode will go live November 15th.
And then December, we will hopefully be our first month of trying to do 2 books. October didn't go so well because this was a little bit of a long read, but I am officially going to be starting 2 books for November. So if I get that done, prepare for more episodes.
Send any well wishes for fast reading or also threats to our Instagram. Again, that is at The Same Page Podcast. And I will make sure he sees them. Even though I run the Instagram, I don't know why I'm saying that. Send them anyway. I will screenshot them and send them to Dana to encourage him to read many a books.
All right. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.